everybody. It is Wednesday, February 19th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Sari Safra-Sukenik, filling in for Joe Wagner on the podcast today. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Welcome, Sari, to the podcast. I should note, folks, she works behind the scenes as a senior producer here on the newsletter, on the Instagram, scripting the podcast for us. It's great to have you behind the mic today.
Great to be here.
So Jill is traveling today. She'll be back tomorrow, but you're in good hands, folks, with Sari. We go back. We worked at the Recount media website on podcasts, among other projects. So Sari, it's been great to have you here as part of the Mo News team these last few months, and looking forward to the podcast today, another jam-packed day of news.
Absolutely. And I've been a long-time listener, so now it's very exciting to be behind the mic.
Long-time listener, first-time co-host.
First-time caller. Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's get to today's headline. There's a lot ahead for you in today's podcast. For the first time in years, direct face-to-face talks between U.S. and Russian leaders. We take you inside a key turning point in relations, what it means for the future of Ukraine, the U.S., Russia, and the world. A lot of big news also in the U.S., a judge siding with Elon Musk and DOGE, saying she will not bar them from extra access to data and the firings they're doing. We'll tell you about the latest across the federal government. An update on that Delta plane that crash landed and flipped upside down in Toronto on Monday. Some passengers are speaking out about what happened. We'll bring you a bit of that. Here in New York, where Sari and I are, a lot of news related to the New York City mayor, 4 top officials resigning, and it comes as the governor is considering ousting the mayor. This is the thing, and apparently might happen for the first time in history. And this next story, of personal interest to me and I think all of humanity, an asteroid that potentially could head here in 2032. We've told you about this asteroid before. NASA has now brought up the odds to 3%, a 3% chance that an asteroid could strike Earth in 2032. So we're keeping an eye on that, and we'll tell you what we know.
I feel the need to say, do not panic after that headline.
Do not panic. There's a 97% chance it does not hit Earth, and there's also some new defense mechanisms that we'll tell you about. Finally, we'll talk about a new study on your brain and AI. Is the technology freeing our brains to do more critical thinking, or is it making us too reliant on the computers and causing potential harm to the way our brains function? We'll tell you about what a new Microsoft study is telling us.
This is why I was reluctant to use ChatGPT for so long. I was scared it was going to burn my brain.
Yeah, make us all dumber. Though we should note that was a concern with calculators, the internet, a whole variety of innovations over time. AI, though, feels a little different. And finally, and on this day in history, we tell you about a historic book out on this day that changed history here in the U.S. and around the world.
All right, let's get started with our top story now. A meeting between the U.S. and Russia kicked off in Saudi Arabia Tuesday. A first step the Trump administration says it is making to end the war in Ukraine. It was the first face-to-face high-level meeting between the countries in more than 3 years. Notably not invited were Ukrainian leaders. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Monday rejected any deal made without Ukraine's involvement, stating, quote, "We cannot recognize any agreements about us without us." He's worried that the U.S. and Russia will carve up his country for Putin without him present and with an ultimatum. The U.S. delegation in Saudi Arabia this week was led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff. They positioned the meeting as a precursor to official peace negotiations and a way for the U.S. and Russia to resume diplomacy. Rubio reported 3 things that were agreed to during these negotiations. 1, that both countries would build back staffing at their respective embassies. 2, that they would work more closely with each other on diplomacy and economic investments. And finally, 3, that Russia and the U.S. will create formal teams to handle negotiations for an end of the war in Ukraine. U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz said another topic that came up was when Trump and Putin might have a face-to-face meeting. A date was not set for that at today's meeting, but Waltz says the 2 presidents have talked about meeting and are expected to. Again, not invited or discussed Ukrainian President Zelensky. Zelensky is currently on a Middle East trip, but canceled a planned trip to Saudi Arabia this week due to his frustration at being cut out of the talks. During remarks in Turkey, he told an audience that it seemed like Russia and the U.S. are preparing an ultimatum for Ukraine, essentially discussing the future of Ukraine without the country present.
Yeah, a lot of frustration from Zelensky here, from the Europeans, as Trump and the Americans have made clear. We're going to talk to Russia right now and set the agenda. Zelensky said, we didn't accept ultimatums back in 2022 when the situation was much more serious, and I have no intention of accepting anything today. Now, as we mentioned, Europe's super concerned about this. They actually scheduled their own summit, this one led by the French president, to bring European countries together. They're very worried and have said, we think Putin is driving a wedge here between the U.S.-European alliance that has stood strong for 80 plus years. Trump really taking on a more neutral stance here when it comes to Europe, when it comes to really all global affairs, when you look at the Canadians and look at everything around the world. And the U.S. made clear last week, we're done backing you up, Europe, after all these years. You have to come up with your own security force. You have to deal with securing Ukraine after this. We're not letting Ukraine into NATO, and we have no interest in U.S. troops in the region. Now, Rubio and U.S. officials have said, wait. Everyone relax. We're going to get everyone involved here when we get there. But this is super, super preliminary, and we just wanted to have a direct meeting here with the Russians. They're not close to a resolution here. And they said, obviously the Ukrainians will have to agree to something here, and we'll bring you in when we're good and ready. But this is very different from the way Biden was handling things. The Europeans have been handling things. They said, they're saying, Putin invaded Ukraine. It's up to the Ukrainians to decide when they want to start peace talks. They should take the lead here. This is their country. Ultimately, they may have to concede some of the territory that Russia has invaded and started to occupy here. But that is their decision. That's on their agenda, not on our agenda. Trump says, no, this war has lasted 3 years as of this month, and we're done here, and we're getting involved, and we're going to end this since you guys are not.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, you mentioned this, but notable, the Biden administration was sort of saying, there will be no concessions made, no territorial concessions. That was their big thing back then. And it's sort of flipped because Trump's priority is not to protect Ukraine and, to invite it into NATO, which they've said they are not going to be doing, but to end the war in general. And Ukraine is just concerned, the rest of the world is well concerned that Putin is sort of licking his chops right now, saying what the U.S. wants to hear. Putin has said that his view is that the Soviet Union made a mistake losing its power and territory in the 90s. He wants to restore glory to Russia. He wants Russia to dominate global affairs. And the question is Putin going to get what he wants? Or is he going to make some concessions and then try again in a few years? There are surrounding European countries that are very concerned that he is going to invade them. So that's something that's, I think, on everyone's mind as the U.S. and Russia are having talks sort of behind closed doors and obviously not inviting Ukraine and other European leaders.
Yeah, when you talk to Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Moldova, you can go along that border there. Major concerns that they could be next here. And remember, Putin took a piece of Ukraine 10 years ago. They took Crimea. Then he was back again a couple of years ago, invading Ukraine again. And that's the view here. And that's also some of the reporting that we're seeing from NBC News. They're talking to a number of top intelligence officials. And they say that Putin has no interest in making peace here, any long-term peace, that he still wants to control all of Ukraine. He thinks he's winning. And he believes he can wait everyone out, that he can wait out Ukraine, he can wait out the U.S. and make another go at it with the lessons learned of this war. And that's why it's been super important for Putin. One of his key demands here is that Ukraine does not join NATO because, of course, he doesn't want to face all NATO forces. And so the fact that the U.S. has now ruled that out sort of before the talks even begin, a major Putin demand is super concerning to Europe and super concerning to Zelensky, who's like, I'll make a deal here, but if the deal is that effectively you just restore your military, restore your weapons to invade me one more time in a couple of years and take the rest of the country, that's super concerning to me. And now keep in mind, as the Trump officials say, listen, we can talk to Putin here. We're about maybe taking off some of these sanctions, restoring ties here. There is a long history of modern presidents with Russia. You might remember George W. Bush once infamously said that he looked into Putin's eyes and saw his soul. That was at the beginning of the Bush administration. By the end, he said that he was wrong about that. And Bush has been asked about that multiple times, saying, his soul darkened. That with power, he wasn't the same guy that he first met at the beginning of the administration. Then fast forward to the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton literally takes a reset button with her to Russia, saying, I'm going to reset our relationship with Russia and Putin. And Putin, they quickly learned, deceived them. So ultimately here, administration after administration has tried, we can talk to Putin here, we can make a deal with him, and failed. And that's why there's a lot of skepticism, including from some Republicans on Capitol Hill, Sari, that there's a lot of optimistic talk from the Rubios and from the Trump administration, but they must beware of what they're getting into.
Rubio yesterday saying that Trump is the only one that can get this done, the only one that can restore relations with Putin. So we'll see how that goes.
We're going to watch that closely, as is Europe, as is Ukraine, as is the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Back in the U.S., we are watching all the legal developments as Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency, aka DOGE, are gaining access to a number of government agencies and moving forward with plans to fire hundreds of thousands of workers. There have been dozens of legal challenges in response to DOGE's moves. Many have not gone well for Musk and his boss, President Trump, at least temporarily. But on Tuesday, a judge ruled in the Trump administration's favor. Federal Judge Tanya Chutkan ruled Tuesday that Musk and DOGE are legally allowed to access agencies' data and fire federal employees. You might remember Chutkan. She is actually an Obama appointee to the court. She oversaw Trump's election interference case related to the 2020 election. But yesterday, she rejected a request made by the attorneys general from 14 Democratic-led states, asking her to put a temporary restraining order on DOGE as they pursue legal challenges to Musk's authority. They argued that Musk has engaged in illegal executive overreach despite being an unelected official, and sought to stop DOGE from continuing to exert influence and gaining access to 7 federal agencies specifically. During arguments, Chutkan expressed skepticism about the Democratic state's claims, calling the request for a restraining order prophylactic. She did acknowledge the state's concerns in her decision that these firings and the changes have caused confusion and chaos at various agencies, but said the court could only intervene if there was proof that DOGE have or will cause imminent, irreparable harm to the states. She didn't believe it cleared that bar. There have been a lot of these lawsuits challenging DOGE efforts to access data, freeze accounts, or fire personnel. This was just the latest.
Yeah, no shortage there. We've told you Congress, effectively deferential here, Republican-led so far, to what DOGE is up to, what Elon Musk is up to. And so it's been left to the courts here as a number of unions, government workers, and Democratic-led states are suing left and right over the various moves here by DOGE. Now, we should say moves like this, not unfamiliar to those of you in the private sector, in the business world. Often major reorganizations of companies, especially companies that are not doing well or not making a profit. You could say, given trillions in debt, the U.S. government would meet that definition. But the big question is, are they approaching this in a legal way, in a smart, strategic way? And the answer for Democrats and a number of government workers is absolutely not. You guys are going and torching things without doing enough research and recon on this. Sari, I got a question over the weekend about this, saying, didn't Bill Clinton fire a whole bunch of government workers? The answer to that, yes. 400,000+ during the Clinton presidency. We should note, fun fact, the last time the U.S. government had a budget surplus, Bill Clinton. But when he came in, they had a whole government commission. They took time. They passed stuff through Congress. They made sure that Republicans and Democrats were aboard over time, and ultimately did downsize the government by several 100,000 jobs from its sort of Cold War era peak there in the late 80s. The argument here is Musk is doing this in a matter of weeks without proper research and recon. Two notable anecdotes here about how quickly they're moving and the need to sort of bring stuff back. Over at the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture yesterday, we learned that they fired the wrong people, several people who are tracking avian flu, the bird flu epidemic right now when it comes to the chickens, egg prices. We've told you about this on the podcast.
They fired a bunch of those people that were tracking that?
Yes. And it turns out late Tuesday, they tried to unfire a number of them, saying, whoa, 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 we need you to come back. Sorry about that confusion.
I need them to come back because I haven't been able to get eggs in weeks.
We all need them back. We all need them back because egg prices are skyrocketing. And this is a serious issue because we're also been tracking the developments over at the CDC where they're finding that these new variants, it's not just birds anymore, right? They're going to cows, they're going to cats, they might be going to humans. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of serious issues the government is tracking. And that's why the whole scorched earth campaign that you might take to a private sector might not work at a government where you have major issues at stake. Issue 2, the National Nuclear Security Administration. Sari, have you heard of that agency before?
I have not.
I had not either. Well, it turns out on Friday that they let go of several hundred employees there. It turns out that agency, those employees, track nuclear weapons here in the country, major nuclear developments, as well as nuclear developments around the world, including over in Ukraine, where there was an attack near Chernobyl last week. And so these employees were fired late Friday. The bosses said, actually, we'd like to unfire a bunch of you. So 350 of them were fired. They want to bring back all but 25 of them. One of the issues they face over there, they didn't have contact information, non-government emails and phones for these people. So they had some struggles over the weekend trying to rehire a number of them. So again, major cuts at a number of agencies. We've talked about USAID. We've talked about, some of the things he's discovered over the Social Security, with potential waste and abuse there in the billions, tens of billions of dollars. But ultimately, some of the moves here that DOGE and Musk are making are having some ramifications, not for this judge we just mentioned, the Obama appointee, notably an Obama appointee, but ultimately when push comes to shove, when it comes to some of these agencies, the judges have been saying, can we just pause for a second and make sure that this isn't doing, in her terminology, irreparable harm to the country and Americans. And I'll end here with, there was another lawsuit filed on Monday. Groups representing unionized workers, taxpayers, and small businesses have sued trying to block DOGE from sensitive IRS files. Now, IRS has their special security on files there due to the way, back in the day, President Nixon abused the system to go after political opponents. There's concern here that Elon Musk, richest man in the world, lots of businesses, with access to that data, could gain very personal information about potential other business leaders, other individuals they might have an issue with. And so there's concern about the amount of access DOGE is getting to that system. So a lot of developments here on the DOGE front. And so we will probably bring you the latest edition of what's happening here tomorrow.
All right, and on to our speed read. From CBS News, a follow-up on the plane crash in Toronto where miraculously all passengers and crew survived. We told you yesterday about that Delta Airlines jet which crashed Monday during a fiery landing, skidding down the tarmac before coming to a stop while flipped upside down. The jet was carrying 76 passengers and 4 crew from Minneapolis, making its descent into the Toronto Pearson Airport. The crash left 21 people injured, 2 critically. The Canadian Transportation Safety Board and multiple transit agencies in the United States are still investigating what caused it. But we know the conditions were very windy upon landing and that the tarmac was icy. You can see some really snowy conditions in the photos and videos. Survivors of the crash spoke to reporters and shared videos yesterday saying they had no warning about what was going to happen, believing the landing was expected to be normal. Some remarkable stories we heard. Take a listen to one passenger. His name is John Nelson. He was speaking to ABC News' George Stephanopoulos on Tuesday.
There was no warning. We were coming in for a landing, and when the plane came in, we hit the runway really hard, and like extremely hard, and we kind of popped up, and it felt like we were leaning to the left. And then what happened was it was just incredibly fast. There was a giant firewall down the side. I could actually feel the heat through the glass. And then we were going sideways. I'm not even sure how many times we tumbled, but we ended upside down. I was hanging there in my seatbelt upside down.
So you're saying how many times? Do you think you flipped more than once?
I'm not sure. It's at least once for sure.
And then, so you're hanging upside down. How did you get out of your seat?
Yeah, at that point, everybody was quiet for a moment or two, and then everybody was trying to scramble to make a sense of what just had happened. And so we released the seatbelts that kind of fell to the floor, which is now the ceiling. and helped the lady next to me get out of her seatbelt. And then you heard the flight attendants yelling, "Open the door, everybody take your stuff and, get out now," right? So they were professional. They were trying to get us out as quickly as possible. Everybody in the cabin was, I would say, relatively calm. We all worked together.
Sari, just incredible stories here. You can't even imagine. You think you're coming in for a landing. It all seems to be going okay. You look out the window. We've all been there. And then suddenly things move so quickly. There's a ball of fire. The plane is rolling. And, seconds later, you find yourself upside down. Somebody described it hanging like bats off the seats. And so just major kudos here again to the crew and the flight attendants for getting all 76 passengers out alive. The plane, again, upside down, snowy, freezing conditions, winds up to 40 miles per hour. Apparently there was an explosion just a couple minutes later as they got people out. The only thing, and some airline experts who follow us on the Mo News Instagram account made a note of, is some of these people, as they were leaving the plane, grabbed their bags, which they tell you do not do. Every second matters. So just a reminder, again, in the very rare scenario that, God forbid, you're ever in a situation like this, get out. Don't try to grab anything.
Yeah, I heard someone say they were unbuckling people, using the floor or using the ceiling as the floor in that case because they were upside down. Really remarkable images of the crew helping everyone get off the plane as quickly as possible. So again, just really incredible to see. Images and videos of the accident showed the CRJ-900 aircraft catch fire when it hit the pavement and proceeded to turn sideways while sliding across the airfield, losing its tail and both wings along the way.
Yeah, though it does show you that these modern planes are built to ensure people survive, even as it flipped, it came to a halt. Now, as for injuries, 19 people initially taken to the hospital, eventually 2 others, so 21 total. We're talking about back sprains, head injuries, anxiety, and nausea and vomiting due to fuel exposure. Now, the investigation continues here. If you look at some of the videos that came out yesterday, you do see it made a very hard landing. Some professional pilots will note that the pilot didn't appear, for whatever reason, to tip the nose slightly up for a softer landing. So the hard landing, the landing gear goes, then the wing goes, then you have an explosion and the rollover situation. But at the same time, Sarah, we get notes from a number of pilots who follow us saying, please don't speculate. Let the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, the National Transportation Safety Board of the U.S., the FAA conduct their investigation to get to the bottom of this.
I saw you posted someone writing, it's okay to clap at the end of plane rides now. I've always felt that was okay. I'm always amazed when I get to the ground. But now I think more than ever, people are really grateful for these pilots who are doing everything in their power to keep them safe, even in some really difficult conditions, it sounds like.
Yeah, we were in Texas over the weekend and landed back actually within minutes of that Toronto plane explosion. I got the alert on the tarmac at LaGuardia. We had just landed from a flight to Texas. And in New York, we were seeing like 50 mile per hour wind gusts. And I was really worried about that because if you've flown into New York airports, especially LaGuardia on the water there, sometimes there's a lot of turbulence as you take off and land. And I made a point of thanking the pilot because he did such an incredible job. It felt like a normal landing despite 50 mile per hour wind gusts there. So thank your pilot. Feel free to applaud, even if you get some dirty looks from your fellow passengers.
Okay, on to a story from the New York Times. Political chaos in New York City and questions about how long the mayor may stay in charge. A whirlwind of resignations by top city officials has followed news of the Justice Department's move last week to drop corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. On Monday, 4 deputy mayors who are in charge of most of the city's function said they are out. That comes as New York Governor Kathy Hochul said she was meeting with key leaders yesterday in Manhattan to discuss, quote, a path forward for Adams. As governor, Hochul has a constitutional power to remove a mayor. It has never been done before in New York state history, but she said she wouldn't take it lightly to overturn the will of the voting people. But let's back up here on how we got here. You might remember federal prosecutors indicted Adams last year for, among other things, accepting $100,000 worth of free plane tickets and luxury hotel stays from Turkish citizens, including at least one government official. It was among several charges announced last fall by the Biden Justice Department for bribery, conspiracy, fraud, and soliciting illegal foreign campaign donations. But those charges were dropped last week by the Trump administration. Their justification for dropping the case was explicitly political. They argued that the investigation would prevent Adams from fully cooperating with Trump's immigration crackdown.
Yeah, they said that Biden filed the charges because they didn't like Adams' politics. Adams was critical of the Biden administration. And they admitted, actually, in their plans to drop this case, they actually hadn't looked at the evidence, hadn't looked at the legal theory behind the case, but we're doing this because they want the New York City mayor's cooperation here. They believe that these charges interfered with the upcoming mayoral election, which is happening here in New York this year. New York elects its mayors in odd-numbered years. And they want Adams to be able to cooperate with Trump and face a clear road to election. Now, notably, they didn't drop the charges permanently. The Justice Department has the right to bring up these charges again last year, leading many to think, well, they're trying to keep him on a leash here to ensure he's behaving well, to ensure that he doesn't get charged again next year. Now, that has led to accusations of a quid pro quo. And so you saw these 4 deputy mayors out of 8 total resign as a result of the decision. They say this is too political for us. This feels dirty. Not the only people to resign. You've seen 7 federal prosecutors resign in New York, in D.C., as well as some conservatives like Federalist Society, conservatives, very much Trump people who say this was too much for us. We won't even file in court to drop these charges. Now, eventually, the Trump administration found someone to file that request. And so a U.S. district judge today will have a hearing on the DOJ asked to drop these charges. Officially, you can't drop them unless a judge says yes. Now, that typically is fait accompli, like the judge will do it based on the Justice Department's arguments. This one's going to be interesting to watch, given some of the arguments here, given the resignations, whether the judge is going to have some hard questions here for the Trump administration and might hit pause on this. So we're watching a lot of legal proceedings here. That's another one of them that we're watching today as the lawyers are set to address the judge and argue for dismissal. And the judge clearly has been watching all of this play out in public.
Yeah, the courts are busy these days.
It's frankly hard to keep track of all these cases. We're doing it. We're trying our best here to keep track of all of them, but there's a lot happening, and it's not going to stop anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, hard to keep track, too, when a lot of these arguments sound the same. It's notable that Eric Adams' team is making some of the same arguments that Trump made when he was facing charges before the 2024 election. Now, Adams is facing a re-election later this year, and his team is making that argument that this is just too close to an election. All right, moving on from CBS News. The odds of an asteroid potentially hitting Earth in just about 7 years rose slightly on Tuesday. NASA, which declared the asteroid the most dangerous object near Earth, said the risk of impact currently stands at just above 3% in its latest update. Of course, that means it has a 97% chance of not hitting Earth. But important reminder to all of you. Everyone's so focused on 3%. We thought it's very important to remind you there's a 97% chance as of now. It does not hit Earth. I think people are reacting to the fact that it's not 1% anymore. So 3% sounds like a lot compared to 1%, which it was a couple days ago. You might have seen some of our colleagues in the media say that the chances of an asteroid hitting Earth have tripled in the last 2 weeks. That is technically true, but tripled meaning going from 1% to 3%. Yes, but still in modern times, this is the highest percentage space officials have put on a potential impact. So large telescopes are intently focused on the asteroid. It's called Asteroid 2024 YR4. It will escape from view behind the sun later this spring, so a lot of attention on it now, keeping track. NASA and the European Space Agency's planetary defense offices are providing daily updates on the asteroid. The European Space Agency updates its website once a day. And on Tuesday, last time we checked, the chances were at 2.8% that the asteroid will hit in 2032. But NASA's Earth Impact Risk Summary now puts the odds at just over 3%. Over the past 2 weeks, as we said, the chances had hovered around 1 to 2%. So now it's 3%, or about a 1 in 32 shot. This would not be a human life-ending asteroid by any shot, just something to look out for. Yes, we should note it has the energy equivalent to a nuclear bomb. It could unleash destruction in a 30-mile radius. So this is not the asteroid that took out the dinosaurs, but they are calling it, in some headlines, an unfortunate title, a city killer.
meaning it could take out a city. But we will have a very long heads up if, God forbid, this thing actually strikes Earth. Now, let me tell you about it. This is about the sizes we believe right now is the Statue of Liberty, about 300 feet tall. But it could be as small as 100 feet. Again, it is far off, heading around the sun right now. And so they will be using some special telescopes and technology to try to get a better sense of its size here in the coming weeks. And in talking to some experts about this, they do think it'll come down from 3%. They believe. Now, the best shot that we will have at really getting a sense of this actually won't come for 3 more years. In 2028, it's going to make its way around here again. Now, there's no shot of it hitting us in 2028, but we will get a much better view of it. And that's when I guess preparations might begin as to what to do. They have calculated the potential impact zone as of now. It's a line that runs basically from South America through Africa through South Asia. So basically Venezuela through Guyana, then through Central Africa, crossing over Yemen. And then there's a potential strike zone in India or Bangladesh. But we've told you about this on the podcast. NASA's had great success with its DART system. Back in 2022, there was success in redirecting an asteroid. Just a bit can nudge it off its course and make sure it doesn't hit Earth. So this system called DART, the Chinese are also preparing their own system. Apparently, there's confidence in those systems that if push comes to shove and we feel that the percentage is too high in a few years of hitting Earth, the technology will be there to shove this off course. And if not that, move people out of the way because they'll be able to figure out what the strike zone will be if it potentially hits Earth. But again, 97% chance it doesn't. It's likely to go down this spring. We'll get some better view of it. This, just an early heads up in case you were making plans for late December 2032.
And again, we'll get a better view of it again in 2028 and then another 4 years to plan for that.
Yeah, don't be too anxious.
All right, our last story from Forbes on some concerns about what AI means for our brains. A recent study conducted by Carnegie Mellon University and Microsoft offers a closer look at how workers interact with AI-generated content and the cognitive trade-offs involved. The concern that it might be atrophying our brains. The research is based on a survey of just over 300 professionals, and it reveals a nuanced transformation. While AI can reduce the mental effort required for many tasks, it may also lead to diminished critical engagement in certain contexts. One of the most striking findings from the study is that 62% of participants reported engaging in less critical thinking when using AI, particularly in routine or lower stakes tasks. This suggests that AI's role is evolving from a passive assistant to an active participant in decision-making processes, one that must be evaluated carefully to prevent over-reliance.
Yeah, be careful here, folks, on what this is doing to your brain. They call this phenomenon mechanized convergence, in which reliance on AI leads to less diverse, less creative outcomes as more users accept AI-generated suggestions without scrutiny. There's growing concern that basically your employees will all come back and they'll all have the same idea, because they'll all ask ChatGPT or their favorite AI. And that goes across the board for educators and students and across all businesses, that AI has a tendency to generalize information. It may lead to basically homogeneous thought here, missing the complexity of human insight. And this isn't the first study that has found this. There was one out of the SBS, the Swiss Business School, recently that found what they call cognitive offloading, that we're delegating the technology to tasks that we should be doing ourselves, and that could have an impact over time. Sari, this feels like what happened with like Google Maps and our ability to just like remember the roads and navigate. They're seeing a huge impact there, as now we're like more than a decade in, almost nearly 2 decades in, on just letting Google Maps and Waze direct us.
Or even just Google in general. I feel like people don't try to rack their brain for information anymore. They just look it up immediately. So we have issues with, what's the word I'm looking for right now?
With recall issues.
Recall, there we go. That's the word I'm looking for. There you go.
We didn't plan that.
We did not plan that. Everyone, yeah, like I said, we have issues with recalling words, like the word recall. But it is the reason why I have been so reluctant to use AI, especially with work things, things that I have relied on myself so long for.
This was the subject, actually, the Mo News interview podcast last year. We talked to Carlos Whitaker. Some of you might follow him, Los Wit, over on Instagram, a friend of ours here at Mo News. And he did an experiment recently where he did 7 weeks without technology. He went to go live with monks and then went to go live with the Amish. And he was talking about how, for the first time in a long time, he sat there wondering things. He's like, I wonder what that's about. We're so quick, to your point, to Google that there is something to problem solving, wondering, trying to figure out like potential reasons why something might be without having that immediate solution at our fingertips. And AI takes things to a new level. Now, at the same time, we should mention that over time, over history, there has always been concern about technology and its impact. You can go back to Socrates was worried about writing and the impact that would have on our brains, because for most of human history until then, we didn't write things down, right? We had conversations. So with the emergence of writing, alphabet, that education, there were concerns about that. Then the printing press and that ability, calculators, teachers of arithmetic said that's going to dumb people down when it comes to math and algebra and those various calculations. The internet, another example, that's going to dumb us down. So, ultimately here, before we totally freak out, that's what we do here on the podcast. We present something that you might freak out about and then tell you don't freak out about it. Can we navigate AI in such a way that doesn't allow our brains to atrophy?
Right. I think for those remedial tasks that we were, planning trips, I've used it for, and things where you're just sort of scouring the internet for information. It's very helpful. And we should mention that AI did not write this podcast because it can do that now too.
It can. The podcast would not be as good. Believe me, I've tried to like certain things. I was like, AI, can you just summarize this one story for me? And it's not very good. By the way, I just asked ChatGPT while we were at this, is AI making us dumber? And ChatGPT answers, that's such a good question and a hot debate right now. What do you think? Some people argue that AI is making us dumber. On the flip side, others say AI is actually making us smarter. Maybe it's less about AI making us dumber and more about how we choose to use it. ChatGPT says, if we let it replace thinking, that's a problem. But if we use it to amplify our abilities, it could be a superpower. ChatGPT, that's actually a pretty good answer, ChatGPT.
It's challenging us to think on our own.
There we go. Even, ChatGPT has an incentive to say no, but it actually presented, both sides there. All right, now time for On This Day in History on this February 19th. You might know him from Hamilton. He's our third vice president of all time. Aaron Burr, on this day in history, was arrested in Alabama on charges of plotting to annex Spanish territory in Louisiana and Mexico to establish his own country. Yes, Aaron Burr, one of the more interesting individuals, besides killing Alexander Hamilton while he was bored as president of the Senate, he created the filibuster. It turns out they would discover that decades later, giving the Senate that power, which frustrates many. And then so bored during his vice presidency that he's off trying to annex territory on his own and establish his own country.
Was it enough just hanging here?
Listen, being vice president is pretty boring. And so Aaron Burr tried to make the most of it. All right, fast forward to the 20th century here. Cracker Jack began including prizes in each box. Literary history here, I mentioned it at the top. On this day in 1963, Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, was published on this day in history. It's super important. It gave voice to women's frustrations with gender roles at the time, really helping to spark the women's rights movement. We have a history of the women's rights movement tracing the impact of Betty Friedan and various impactful individuals there. It was a Mo News interview podcast last year. So check out the Mo News interview podcast for that. Some soft drink history for you. Cherry Coke, introduced on this day in 1985. So a happy 40th birthday to Cherry Coke.
You know what I was thinking about recently? Do you remember Vanilla Coke?
I do.
What happened to that?
I think most of us voted thumbs down on Vanilla Coke.
I loved Vanilla Coke.
Listen, Coke has had a long history. They had a controversy in the 80s where they tried to change the formula and they had to go back. So they got to be very careful there. At least with the OG, with these others, they've had some success.
Guess not vanilla.
Not vanilla. Cherry Coke, definitely, though. All right, a bit of pop culture history here. On this day in 1968, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, starring Fred Rogers, premiered nationwide. Amazing film a couple years ago. I don't know if you caught it. Tom Hanks playing Mr. Rogers.
Amazing documentary, too, came out a few years ago.
There's a lot on him. We miss Fred Rogers in our lives. And finally, in music history on this day, REM's Losing My Religion comes out on this day, 34 years ago.
A 90s classic. All right, this was really fun. My first day on the podcast.
It has been great having you on, Sari.
I admit I was very nervous, but
oh no,
you were a great co-host. You made me feel comfortable the whole time.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Thank you for your great work. For all of you in Mo Newsland, we're trying to make a point. Some of the feedback we got, actually, Sari oversaw the survey, was you want to meet other members of the Mo News team. So, Sari, you're invited back anytime here on the pod. We want to thank all of you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, leave us a review. Share it with your friends. Share it with your colleagues, your family. Appreciate everyone who spreads the word here about Mo News. Important note, the Mo newsletter now comes out in the afternoon. So it is our complimentary edition. If you listen to this podcast in the morning, the afternoon edition, as of yesterday, gives you the news that happened throughout the day so you don't have to scroll through Instagram all day.
All right. Hope to be with you all again soon.
Thanks, Sari. Jill will be back on the podcast tomorrow. We'll see all you guys soon.